Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Sunday edition of the True Life Podcast. We are here with the whole team, and we are going to hopefully get into some great debates. We've got a myriad of different positions about different things. And let's just start off going around the panel. We'll start off with Kevin. Kevin, can you introduce yourself for those who may not be aware of how great and who you are?
You can't leave it like that. All right, my name's Kevin. Holt is my fabricated shortened last name. Swiss-born, U.S. grown, raised partially, nomadic type person. Currently living in Bali, trying to be a writer and figuring out how I can sustain living in Bali. Still, it's been a year and a half, and I'm trying to figure out how to keep the money coming in.
And you've
Thanks
got
for the
one
intro.
book out. Yeah, you got what the tell them the name of your book, the first one.
Yeah, first book's called Young, Successful, and Miserable. I wrote it after my second time quitting the corporate world, and it was an accumulation of frustration, rage, and knowledge I'd gained during that time, and I poured it all out in like 2 weeks. And now I'm working on a second one, which is about divorce and stuff like that, which you guys have offered to read. I'm almost letting you down. I wanted to get it out last week, hurt my back. I haven't done anything. Hopefully this week I'll finish the draft.
Nice, looking forward to it. Ben, can you introduce yourself for people who may not have might not be aware of who you are?
Benjamin George. My website's Benjamin C. George. I have a book which initiated all of this called No Absolutes, the Framework for Life, at least George and I's conversations. And there's a podcast that'll be happening shortly under the same veil. So
fantastic. Ranga, what tell us about yourself a little bit, buddy?
Self-introduction makes me anxious. So I begin to wonder why is that? And then it's because lack of a solid answer. So it's pretty difficult to go there. And it seems very, you have to be very biased about it.
So, you got to animate your ego to participate in the dream state to some extent. I understand what you're saying.
Most narcissistic move I ever made was having my own website with my name on it. It felt weird.
That's weird. Paul, tell us about yourself, man. For those who may not know you, Paul in the dark over here, why don't you tell the people who you are?
Yeah, my name is Paul Apau. Live on the island of Maui in the state of Hawaii. And not much more than that. Avid reader. I love to read.
Beekeeper,
Nice.
right?
Beekeeper, yeah.
Beekeeper.
Macadamia farmer.
Right.
May I ask you a bee question?
Yeah. What's up?
Because I had my uncle's godfather was a beekeeper in Switzerland, and he was convinced, even then, like 20 years ago, that cell phone towers were screwing up his bees' navigation. And I'm wondering what you think about that, especially with 5G and stuff like that.
Yeah. Not really something I've I do honeybee research, but not that type. The stuff I do is more about systemics, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, stuff like that. But I've talked to a lot of beekeepers who would agree with your grandfather.
Right.
Your grandfather dead?
Yeah, it was my uncle's godfather. It's a bit
Your
of a
uncle's
weird connection.
godfather,
He's
yeah.
been dead for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know a bunch of beekeepers who would agree with that. Nothing I've really done a lot of research on. I kind of just stick to my own little world, but but I've heard that. I've heard a lot of beekeepers say that.
Do you think that translates? Like if that's true, if those towers mess up the rhythm of the bee or their rhythm, wouldn't they also mess up ours?
I mean, it's possible. Again, not something that I've done a lot of looking into, but I mean, honeybees are really delicate, little insects, and that have pretty complicated forms of communication that are pheromone driven and also movement driven, and the slightest things tend to mess them up pretty easily, but it's the same thing when people ask me about like the work that I do with research with honeybees. is, is this what's killing honeybees? Is this the problem with honeybees? Is it colony collapse disorder? Is it, it's accumulation of all types of things. Just like, since industrialization, we've been doing a lot of damage, not just to honeybees, I believe, but to a lot of things.
Yeah,
if you took away cell phone towers, would honeybees be better off? Like, I don't know, maybe slightly. But
it sounds to me like you're advocating for people to go out and tear down 5G towers, Paul.
what I'm advocating for is for people to, make, little changes in their lives that help to support, the environment, even if it's just the stuff that they do at home, to help, bring back honeybee populations to, to a much greater level than where they are. They in massive decline all around the world for, a while now. I raise queens, and I tell people it's like putting a little Hello Kitty Band-Aid on a cut that requires like 100 stitches. We need to fix things moving forward. I mean, it's pretty detrimental to honeybees and honeybee populations that we do that.
It is. That is. What so Ben brought up a big topic that I kind of wanted to start off with today. Is the idea of divine right. You guys familiar with this idea? This idea that was popular in the medieval ages, where someone who rules over the people strictly because they were ordained by God or by a higher power. And we saw this week the Queen has passed. And I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they rule by divine right? Like, who died and made them king and queen?
I think that was the original mandate, right?
Right.
Now, I'm not sure if they still cite that. I didn't watch the ceremony. I'm not actually too intimate with the monarchy.
Right.
Mostly because I don't care for, people who think that they can rule over other people. So, but I think that was the original mandate, was that they were, in that, and it's not just the British Empire, but that was, it's been many of the monarchical systems in our past, that they were, divinely instituted by God to be able to rule, which I thought was an interesting topic, because I think it very much applies to many different aspects of what we're looking at in society today.
Like what? Like what else do you think it applies to?
Well, I mean, we've kind of, with the advent of the internet and technology and the movement towards, scientific knowledge and things like that, we've created different religions, if you will. And one of those religions is certainly politics. Another one is money. From a personal experience, I took a startup through a program, and I was blown away by how much it was almost like a religious Sunday sermon, church going experience. It was people, expressing themselves, giving testimony, kind of, and it was very much just completely similar to that. And I've been, involved in a few corporate things that I've noticed the same thing. And so I think, there is, and look at like a person like Elon Musk. He's exalted by many people, right? So I think our detachment from religion as kind of an institution has moved that void that people typically have to different directions. And I think a lot of those directions kind of directly apply to this whole kind of divine right. Like, you have these people with all of the money, all of the resources, dictating all of the rules. By what account? Well, because they made it, because they were successful, because they achieved all of this. It's similar in aspects to kind of that older system, but it kind of diverges into modernity.
Yeah. What do you think, Kevin? What do you think about, you've traveled to different places, you've seen Japan, I know they have an emperor there. I'm not too sure about their government, but do they have some sort of divine right?
They used to, and I believe that was the whole reason for the sort of the excuse that the U.S. told itself for the bombing, the nuclear bombs, because in those days he did have the divine right, and the people were going to do whatever he said. So when he said that, okay, we're going to defend Japan to the last man, that would have happened. Like, the people were just completely devoted to doing whatever he said. So the calculation was that, well, we're going to lose 1 million soldiers trying to invade Japan and untold numbers of people in Japan defending it. So we'll do the bombs and hopefully mitigate that loss. Whether or not that was the right decision, I don't know. But yeah, that they did have that tradition. I don't think it's the same anymore. They don't. It's like the Queen now. It's sort of just a theatrical post, and they have a prime minister who kind of runs as a dictator, and they have the emperor that just chills and is responsible for the years, because they still count it in emperor years over there.
That's interesting. Paul,
I
what
remember
about
my birth,
sorry.
Showa 57. Showa emperor year 57. That's what I was born.
Yeah. Paul, what about the king and queen of Hawaii? Did they rule by like divine right?
I mean, they were divine. I mean, I think that's the difference, like what we're talking about here with like Japan and like ancient Egypt, and then like European kings and queens. That I think is my understanding that like it's mostly in Europe where it was like a given rights to rule by God, divine right, and then a lot of the other places around the world, kings and queens were divine. And I think that may be true with Japan too. I don't know, maybe Kevin, you could point more to that, but
yeah, that he had divine right back in the
Well,
those days.
they actually, I think what he's alluding to is that they actually like it's kind of like the Pope. Like as soon as you're the Pope, you're kind of a different level of human type idea. You are divinity at that point.
Yeah, like ancient pharaohs were divine. Right? They weren't given the right by something, from a god to rule. They actually were divine.
But what do you mean by they were divine?
Isn't that just semantics?
Right. That was what they called the rulers at that point. Like that. So there was no distinction between like a god and the rulers. A ruler was God essentially.
Well, like wasn't it in like with like European kings and queens that it was given the right to rule politically over people, and then
I see.
Were actually given the right, to speak for God.
Right.
And it was kind of a different thing. Whereas like in Egypt, they were like born of the gods. They were actually divine themselves. I don't know. I kind of understand it to be a little bit different thing. I think in Japan it was the same way too, is that the emperor was divine, not given rights to rule by God, but actually was God.
Wow. See that? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, which begs the question, what is that? What does that imply? What does that mean? I mean, go ahead.
I think it just means that there was a ruthless dictator in charge that lied to everybody, right? Like that's what that means. Like, I'm smarter than you. I can read. You guys are dumb. I'm the king. I'm like, why? Because God said so. In fact, I'm God. And if you do anything to me, I'm going to bring hellfire on you. So get back to the fields and start working.
I would say by and large, that was, mostly the case, at least from my purview of history. Now, there are different exceptions. There were rulers who were really great to their people, but at the same time, I found it, I would agree with you, George. I think it was a lot of an excuse to take advantage and, reap resources and, maintain power structures.
Yeah, I come to the idea of like, we've all heard I'll put the fear of God in you. Like, why? If you fear God, because God will kill you. So then might God just be another name for the almighty, powerful? I mean, those two things can be synonymous. So if you are the most powerful, then you become God, right? I heard mother is the word for God on the lips of a child, right? Because that the mother sustains life and that could kill that child. But so too, if that is true, so too, then the word for God on the lips of a worker would be the state, in some weird way, like maybe back then, or the king or the queen. But yeah, I think now, especially now where some of us are very fortunate to live in a world where we have so much, we have so many resources. Yeah, where, damn, I should bring Dan in here. Dan Hawk says manifest destiny, right? Like, you just decide to run across the states. You just decide to run across the West, and whatever you conquer, you become God at. Does anybody think that there should be, people should have a divine right to rule? Anybody on the panel think that someone should have that right?
I don't think so. And if you look at the history, it just goes, if you try to look at in a bigger picture where the average IQ of a human being is increasing, or it doesn't have to be for the good always, but in this case I feel like the general tendencies start changing, but very slowly, right? It's not like evolution doesn't happen at a single point. It's a stretch of time, right? Thousands and thousands of years. So that change is always there. Sometimes when I get frustrated or angry by that part, uh, that's the reminder that things are changing. Just the expectations within me is too fast, right, at a global level.
Well, when you see a solution, it's one of those things where it's like, well, can everybody see this? Oh, they can't. Oh, what do they have to learn to see the solution? Oh, it's actually everything that I've spent the past years of my life doing. Oh, okay. Well, there's a process to all of these things.
Do you think that, like, so when we, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we discussed it once before. It seems like the challenge is, how do we increase self-governance while expanding the in-group at the same time? Because clearly the more rulers you have, the more patriarchal leadership you have, the less individual freedom you have. So I'm fully in alignment with the idea of a self-governing, what George was talking about, blockchain-based, decentralized model of existence. But how do you stop the tribalism that would probably result from, that's resulting from history, right? We were the small groups, we were constantly battling each other for stuff. We got some strong guy who came in, took it all over, made it stable, fought another strong guy, slowly expanded like that, and there was always conflict. So I guess the question is conflict inevitable, or do we have a way to do what I said, expand the in-group while keeping the units small?
So, I think at one level, conflict can be viewed as inevitable. However, when you put it into the context of a global situation where people now are connected and people do, they love the internet, right? They love the aspect of more information. And so we have these kind of institutions in the world now where people might be more reluctant to let them go than, say, in the past, where the only aspects of their lives were, maintaining a farm or being part of a guild or something like that. Because of the greater opportunity, I think it does potentially give us the opportunity to surpass the insurmountable conflict, at least for a time. And so the way I looked at it and the way I kind of formulated it is, you have to be able to compete in the marketplace, right? You have to be able to compete in the wide world. And if you can compete in that wide world and you can create individual wealth within that system, that will become a duplicatable model that then will become almost spread like a virus. Because why would I not want to be part of something that's creating individual wealth, individual liberty, individual freedom, or as opposed to being attached to the system that's telling me what I can and can't do, is holding me down, that is barriers of entry, et cetera, et cetera. I think you create basically a magnetic environment where people say, hey, those are the things that are important in life. Those are the aspects of life. That's the philosophy of life that I want to pursue. So I'm going to see how I can be a part of the system. And if we create the right thing where it is focused on individual wealth, where each person's opinions and ideas are represented in a grain, and being able to, we don't have to make this network of podcasting in order to be heard type idea. I think that is maybe the element that allows us to kind of hop over that conflict.
What do you say though to the idea that conflict is the mother of invention? It seems that like so many wars, and I don't necessarily believe this myself, but it seems to me there are lots of theories that say we must be at odds with each other so we continue to move forward the idea of technology. And if you look at the technology that we have, most of it has come from war. Maybe that's because we develop it for war, but it's still coming out of conflict and war. And when two people, be it expert boxers or expert debaters, come together and fight, be it verbally or physically, the outcome of that tends to be like a sharper form. What do you think about that?
I would say that necessity is the mother of invention.
Okay.
And so, obviously conflict is going to breed necessity, but necessity comes from other places as well.
I think war was an expression of conflict. I think conflict will continue to happen throughout human existence, let's say, because with our limited consciousness, we perceive some way, and in order to go ahead, like progress as a humanity, you need to have conflicting opinions and take that. But people who are stubbornly caught up in it, if they are caught up in it, that's the resultant is what? Because if I cannot convince you, I'm gonna kill you, kind of stuff. But now it's changing. We can agree to disagree, and
Well, I think it's also changing too, back to our previous conversation about language and how that influences things. Instead of having us to wage war with our fists, we can articulate ourselves and present evidence and have, differing opinions, but then analyze those opinions. As long as people are willing to come to the table, I think we have that option that doesn't necessitate conflict.
Yeah. It almost like, why not? What do you think about the Malthusian concept of like, let's just kill half the people? Like, I'm not saying I agree with that, but I think that there's a group of people that do think that, when you start hearing terms about like useless eaters or low IQs, and again, it's not, I'll just be devil's advocate and pretend I'm a Malthusian. Like, look, we need to get rid of all these dummies. Okay. There's a bunch of dummies. They don't do anything. Like, they can barely talk. They don't do anything. They just take up space, and they're outpopulating people that are actually doing stuff. We should just get rid of all of them. Let's just starve them. The world will be a better place.
But what are we supposed to do though?
Not feed them. We don't still send them. We pretend that there's a problem in Ukraine, and then we don't feed them.
That will stealthily kill them off without them knowing it or acknowledging it. I wonder what that could be.
We can have a virus. How about a virus?
Oh boy, we're getting into the weeds now, boys.
No, I'm just half kidding.
But would that work? I mean, if you could lower the Earth's, if you could just drop down the population by, I don't know, 1/3. If you could get rid of 1/3 of people that are not productive, would that change the world for the better?
Be more jobs, maybe.
No,
Rents
because when you make the decision of killing the unproductive people, it's with the idea that our goal as a human is to be productive.
That's a good point.
What if our goal is to be lazy? Then they should be killing the productive ones.
I think that they are, though. Aren't they already doing that?
By non-participation?
Yes.
Administratively, yeah.
Administratively.
I think it's about bringing them to the table. I
agree.
All of unproductiveness comes from system and not from individuality.
Yeah. I would concur with that. And another more perhaps humanistic aspect of that is, the responsibility of, the populace to everyone else is not, hey, you guys aren't up to snuff, we're going to kill you all. You have to analyze why these people aren't up to snuff. Why is there people who are poor? Why is there people who are uneducated? Why are there people who are lower educated? Why do all of these things happen? And the reality, I think, of that situation is once you start to really evaluate those aspects of society and culture, you see that the fundamental reasons typically fall back to, the pursuit of money and power for a lot of these aspects of society. For instance, the American education system was founded by a communist guy who was trying to found a system that wanted to create more worker bees. We adopted that. Right? So what's the, when we're actually talking about that, the actual solution is a much longer term solution, which nobody wants, because politics are very snap, 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 and 4 years here, 4 years here. I have to campaign about this and this and this. And if I can't fix it in a very quick time frame, it's not anything that I need to talk about. But the real solutions are, why do these problems exist in society? And when you solve those solutions, you eventually solve the grander problem. But you have to start with solving the root of the cause. And we know this intuitively. We just don't like to acknowledge it politically or financially.
And there's another angle to this, in that people are surviving today. How do I put this? People are existing today that maybe otherwise would not have made it, because we have systems in place to enable them. Like a paraplegic 200 years ago is not going to make it, right? But now we've got all this support and medical care. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's great that we have the ability to prolong life where it wouldn't have otherwise existed. But yeah, a lot of people wouldn't have made it.
Right. And the sad part of that part is that there is an altruistic and humanistic aspect of it, but there's also a monetary aspect to it. Those people are now an indentured servant to that system, where the funds of not only them, but their, people who love them are going to end up in that pipeline of monetary wealth. And it's not going to be transitioned to the family. It's not going to spread out, to the community. It's going to an entity that does not have any care, concern, or investment in prolonging those individual lines, those family lines, those communal lines. They're focused on just accumulating more and more wealth. I mean, we just saw that greatest transfer of wealth that we've ever seen in human history. Well, kind of recorded anyway.
Yeah, it almost seems to me that, if there is, it almost seems to me that the underclass, be it people that have had a pre-existing condition or that fall through the cracks in education, like they just become fodder for the system. Like all of a sudden now they're dependent on the medical system, but the medical assistant needs them as fuel to continue to fire their profits, and it's almost maybe that is the way our society is run. Like we're no longer looked at being productive people. We're just looked at being numbers. We're just looked at being,
big data.
Yeah, big data. It kind of strips away the humanity resources. Yeah. That's a good way to think about it. It makes me wonder if this move towards science, and it makes me also wonder if, this move towards science, if we're just resources and we can be looked at like numbers, then what's to stop the process of eugenics from happening, or like it just becomes easier to implement these ideas based on science to create productivity. If we're already going down that road, if we're already looking at ourselves stripped of humanity, what's to stop us from being like, you know what, you have to have a license to have kids, you have to have this to have kids, or it just seems like that's kind of the road we're going down, unless we make some sort of change. What do you guys think?
It's like this, right? Your mental wavelength is kind of traveling in the ship with other mental wavelengths, and few people control that, right? So regardless of how much ever we try to individualize and come out of it, there is some part of dependency still there. It's a lot of sacrificial things we might have to do to completely get into a recluse or so a certain amount of, let's say, normal life as us tied along the system, so we can be aware of it. What's that?
Sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
No, that was it. Just
Oh no, so I'm saying these are tough like these are kind of questions that really make me question what I think, because I do like the free market. I'm in favor of capitalism generally, but the logical extension of that is that eventually private ownership will own all of the factors of production if we go fully AI. And then what do you do with the 80 or 90% of people whose jobs no longer exist because they can't all be AI mechanics or robot repair people? And I don't know how we're going to, I mean, you think, for example, like if we were able to figure out how to farm and take care of all our foods with AI, is it fair that somebody owns all of that? Or is there a way that we can, like blockchain solution or whatever, where we distribute ownership of that process and we all get the fruits of that?
Well,
yeah, there's totally a way. I think that it's not like Google made Google. It's like we all pitched into that. Like if you paid taxes in America, you founded Google. Like they were founded by the taxpayer. Once it became profitable, they spun it off into a private company. They probably grew it a lot more, but everybody paid into that. So everybody should be getting like a freedom dividend from that. And if AI runs everything, well, okay, so how about this? Like if you have like in a car plant, they have different robots that make different parts. Why don't those robots pay taxes? Why don't those robots pay a percentage of the profits into the system, and then we get that? Like we all built it. You know what I mean? Like we all built this whole system, but now there's a few people that are like, actually, we built it. I own the company. You know, like that's bullshit. No, you didn't. You are the front man for it, but everybody else kicked in. And maybe that's the end result, is that the people that are consolidating power end up just being murdered because they're so greedy and selfish. Like I'm not saying we should do that.
It wouldn't be the
They'll-
first time in history.
Yeah, they'll never tax those machines, but they'll give them rights to vote.
So, you know, I think we do face a precipice here where if we do not come up with a system that does enable the individual to actually benefit from these things, we are going to end up in a situation that Kevin just described, where you are going to have a small collective group of people who accumulate everything of all of the resources, all of the control, all of the systems, all of the supply chains. And, you know, we're already seeing that today. It's not too far of a distant future. I mean, you know, when you look at the amount of wealth in the world and where it's distributed, it's not hard to see that where this direction is going. And then if you plot it over time, it's really easy to see where it's going. So, you know, the reality of that is, you know, you have to come up with something that competes in the marketplace. You have to be able to outcompete the competitors, because that's the only solution that is where you can come to some sort of you know, redistribution of funds, if you will, without conflict. Otherwise, you have to go murder those people.
You know, it seems like manifest destiny. If we look at what happened, like, you know, Dan Hawk was telling us a little bit about Indians being moved to reservations. And like, if you look at a smart city, it's kind of a new age reservation. Like they want to move people off the land and into a smart city. You want to move people off the land and into a reservation.
Mm-hmm.
And like when you know, it seems similar to me. And why wouldn't it be? If history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, it's very similar to see that happening.
I agree.
That's a nice way to put it. Because I don't think it repeats the exact same way.
Right.
It goes in a spiral, so there are a lot of similarities. So it feels like so much is happening but there is a lot of difference as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that Paul, why do you think that they would never tax the robots? Like, why? If we could get like a vote, I mean, you could theoretically put out, especially in today's time, you could start maybe not a GoFundMe, but you could get a petition out there and get enough people to sign it that says, "Hey, we think that the robots should be paying our taxes." Like, why wouldn't that work, Paul?
That was kind of more of a joke, George.
Well, you know, I would chime in and say, because people who are power hungry typically like to absorb more power. They don't like to distribute it. So I think, you know, any sort of vote in that instance, that's going to cut into the bottom line of not just them, but their shareholders is going to be heavily resistant.
Yeah, that's a great point. But don't you get to the point too? I remember hearing, being a union guy like I am, I remember hearing a story about Eugene Debs, who was like a great union leader, and Henry Ford. And so Eugene Debs and Henry Ford are walking down the Ford plant when all the new robot arms came in. And Henry Ford looks at Eugene and he goes, "Hey, Eugene, how are you going to get those robots to pay union dues?" And Eugene Debs says, "Hey, Henry, how are you going to get those robots to buy your cars?" You know what I mean? Like, so don't we kind of get into that catch-22 where, hey, great, there's not enough jobs for anybody, but guess what? And then there's no more commerce. You know, you have controlled everything, and now no one's buying anything because they don't have any money unless you give them money. And maybe that's the debate happening with giving people income right now.
Right. That's the you'll own nothing and like it idea. Is that you're going to get a monthly stipend to go off and play in the metaverse, to buy your digital stuff and go off in a Ready Player One experience and collect all of these things, when in reality you live in a box, a 2x2 cubicle. What that does on a consumer level in capitalism is, I think you're right. I think that devastates the system. But at the same time, we have come so far with robotics and automation and artificial intelligence that what is the system, what is it created for to begin with? Why does that whole supply chain system exist? Because you need labor to extract resources to provide the ever encroaching aspect of technology and advancement, things like this. But what happens if you no longer need the labor? What happens if you can extract resources automatically and process resources automatically and build things automatically? Well, you don't need a labor force. Now, there's the utopian future of this, which is like a Star Trek, right? And there's many dystopian parts of this, which I think when you factor in the human factor of all of this, the dystopian ones kind of look more realistic. And that's a dangerous and scary, idea. But I think that's the reality we do face.
No, I think it's both of utopian and dystopian happen at the same time. It's the movies just differ on which observer they are showing. When you see all these superhero movies where they are attacking, there are millions of people who die, which we don't focus on. So, and as an average person, I think we would have to watch more dystopian films to be prepared. But yeah, if you are in a different boat, I think it's different.
I think that there's what does it say about our society when all the biggest movies are like the fantasies of a 12-year-old boy? Like, I'm Flash, I'm the Incredible Hulk. They're all like, every single top movie is like a Marvel book, which is like the fantasy of a 12-year-old boy who has no power. Like, is that something people are doing on purpose? Like, are we trying to make sure that every man in America is an infant child that just sits around and plays video games and reads comic books and wishes they were Spider-Man or the Incredible Hulk? Like, that's like all the top movies. Like, that's where all the money goes. Or is that who's running our world? Is like these man boys that like they've just fantasized about having all this power, and now they've somehow found themselves as like Dr. Evil or like,
or they're
Lex
trying
Luthor.
To be superheroes.
Yeah, or they're trying to be superheroes. I mean, I think that the world, you can see the world around you if you look at it, and you need not look far to your nearest billboard to see what people think of society. If you look at media as a mirror of society.
I mean, women love these movies too. My sister and my mom, I think, like them even more than I do. And I heard Jordan Peterson talk about this once. He says that the comic book trend we're in now, the last 20 years, where that's all that comes out, it seems, is to replace what he considers a godlessness and the void of losing faith in religions. And these comic book characters are demigods. They've got these powers. They fight for good. And that's his theory.
I don't think the fantasies of 12-year-old boys are a lot different than the fantasies of grown men.
Not too many men I've met.
And that's the thing, right? All these things on global level as a group, they are not.
What's a grown
Let's say,
man?
what's that? No,
Never mind. Go ahead.
so the movies, right, on a it is affected on a group dynamics, right? People, I don't think it's run by the minds of 12-year-olds, but rather that this is what brings in money is the driving factor in almost everything. So that goes back to the, if someone is going to invest, they're going to want higher returns. That's all they care. It's not about producing good quality. That's not an average person's mind. I feel like some people go out of the way forgetting financial concerns for quality, but most of it comes back to what's going to bring this investment 10 is to 1 or something. And when they go back to the data, it's there. So it's like it's going to be a self-fulfilling loop until a certain group of people really branch out of it.
A diminishing one at that.
Yeah.
And I think to that point, I think we are seeing that diminishing loop. They have gotten so constrained by the aspect of money that
Right.
when they look at the data, to your point, is that they're like, well, we can't stray from this because this was $500 million that we made net, gross off of this or whatever. So I think it is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that instance. But I do think there is a certain aspect to, what that says about the culture that we're putting out there. Because, when we grew up, science fiction was one of those things where it was all over the place. There was many different science fiction things. There was all the Star Treks and all that stuff. And there is a saying that science fiction eventually becomes science fact, right? If you go back to the previous ages of science fiction, those are a lot of the things that we have technologically available to us today. And then if you look at what the richest people in the world are spending a lot of their money on, it is to try to become superheroes. They're trying to prolong their lives. They're working on immortality. There's the transhumanist movement. There is all of these things where that's where these 12-year-old boys who never grew up and became men, I'll take that debate anytime, anybody, they are going down this pathway of societal destruction, but definitely, trying to achieve these different things, outside the bounds of culture and outside the bounds of what that means to everybody else.
Yeah, I agree. Here's an interesting question. Dan brings this one in. Can you create a video game without action? I think this is talking about, be it a movie or be it anything. Can you create a video game without? I don't know if you can create anything without action. What do you think, Ranga?
What kind of action are we referring to in this?
Right.
That's
I
a
would
good
agree
point.
with that, because you have like The Sims, right? There's not a
Mm.
lot of action in The Sims or like Sim City where you're building something, but there is action in the sense that things are actually progressing. So I guess it would come down to the definition of action.
I'll tell
Yeah.
you one game on PS4 which is the least I found to be containing action.
Okay.
It's called Everything, and in the game you just become things, all living things. So you can either become a planet or a stone in a particular planet, and the backlog is of all the quotes of Alan Watts, and that's a game. So I feel like you can experience becoming everything just listening to that. And
That's
I
pretty
don't think
awesome.
that has action. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's action at some point because you're turning one thing into something else. Your perception into a planet, into a rock, or something like that.
Yes.
So I think it really, how do you define action? Or if it's like an action movie, like superhero type stuff, I think there's definitely, to what you just said, there's definitely a lot of those games. There's a lot of like mystery type games. I remember way back in the day, what was that? Mystic Isles
Myst?
or something like Myst.
Myst,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes. That was the one.
Yeah. You're just walking around for most of the game.
Mm-hmm.
It
I guess
seems
Dan
to-
wants to know if a game that was just a fish tank would do well. Fish
maybe.
swimming around. I
Yeah.
don't think so.
Well, Farmville, right? That game made hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars for people just building a farm and having.
But they're still doing something, right? They're still like clicking.
Right, there's still action, yeah. Well, and if you get into the psychological aspects of it, it really, kicks off that dopamine aspect in the brain, and it gives these people little reward drips throughout the day.
Random
so they stay
rewards,
addicted.
apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
Candy Crush is the thing, right? I see it's the least amount of action from the participant. Touch of a button and it can keep you hooked on for hours, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there's some sort of mental action. I was trying to think, like, when you watch a fish tank, if you go to the aquarium, it's pretty relaxing. You're just like watching the fish swim, and they're all moving in like a perfect kind of harmony with the water. I don't know if that would be a game, but it's almost
for
a form
sure.
of
But
meditation.
would you sit down and fire up your PS4 and just watch it for 2 hours?
Well, maybe it was a screensaver or something, but I don't think I would sit there and watch it. I mean, it might be in the background, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think I could come up with one like that. Let me ask you guys this. On the top, like, it seems to me one way to fundamentally change society is to change the way people think. And the way we do that, or we have done that before, is with narratives. Like, be it God, and most societies or cultures are built around a narrative, be it a divine king or God or religion. Maybe these are the foundations of societies. But it seems to me if you were to put on a tinfoil hat, or just to do a thought experiment, like like COVID has changed, and I wish I could see the research on this. I bet you people have it, but COVID has fundamentally changed the way people think about disease. And there's probably a lot of documentation on what percentage of people got the jab, what percentage of people were able to be confined to their house. There's like, they could probably tell a lot just by, we had every station blast out this message. Here's the effects that it had. And if you had that information, you could do something similar and get better results. Like, if you believe that you can do something over and over and get better results because you can change things to make it better, then shouldn't you also be able to change a narrative? And if the results you want to get is changing behavior, you should be able to change people's behavior in steps like that. So if you wanted people to rally around a narrative of health, you would use things like, okay, the planet is unhealthy. We all have to come together, regardless of what race you are, of how old you are, of your sexual orientation. We can all agree that we have to save the planet, right? Right. So let's get together and pay this. Like, I can see how some of these huge narratives take place. Like, maybe it is an attempt from people who are passionately care about the world, trying to unite people, because people care about the planet. That's one way to unite people. Another way to unite people is like, hey, there's a giant virus. We're all going to die. You almost have to have these cataclysmic ideas of destruction to bring people together. Since it's 9/11, remember what happened after 9/11 in the United States? Like, everybody came together. Now, granted, we came together to go kill people, but that's what we do. Like, we come together when there's a crisis. So if we were a government, if we were the governing body, wouldn't we try to think of like a crisis to get people to come together? Like, and if that's true, isn't it probably true that that's what people are doing in like the World Economic Forum and in the United States and China? Like, aren't they looking for ideas to bring people together? And don't these ideas of crisis kind of fit that bill?
I think they absolutely do, but I think an important point to look in that is that, there's not a singular motive. And we can observe that there's not a singular motive because, you will have, these crises, but then you'll also have these transfers of wealth. So, yes, there is an idea that people want to bring people together, and you can definitely do that via crisis. I mean, I think there's, pain and fear are the greatest motivators. I think love comes in a third, a distant third for a lot of people, and maybe even not a third for some. But pain and fear really motivate a lot of people. And so if you can spark that fear mechanism in somebody, now you have their entire attention. Not only the fact that you have their attention, but now if you can perpetuate a narrative to them, they're going to buy into that narrative. They're not asking what your motivations are. They're not asking, is this altruistic? And I think in often cases, especially if we look back in history, we can see that most of these things, if not all of them, are not altruistic at the end of the day. They are enabled to create a movement, to create a response, to create that, economic shift. But at the end of the day, who benefits from that is the small group of people. And by and large, there's millions of deaths, there's famines, there's property loss, there's genocide in some cases. So I think there is something to be said about a narrative being able to motivate people, but it also really comes down to, at the end of the day, what's the motivations? Who are the people who are providing that narrative, and what are their motivations?
Hey, George, when you were saying that, you sounded really optimistic, but I don't think that was anywhere close to being the reality for at least COVID. I was like, he's definitely not talking about COVID, right? No, because just take this one thing of like, you want to bring people together, and one of the most simplistic physical rules were, oh, we're going to maintain distance. It starts from there. So,
right, but at the same time, it did have everybody mentally focused on the same thing, which means they're not looking over here. They're not looking over here. They're just looking right here. So
Yes.
It is bringing people together in a sense.
It's like when 9/11 happened. After that, the Japanese enacted sweeping new terrorism laws. The Japanese never had terrorism, right?
Interesting.
It saw the focus somewhere else, and Switzerland did something similar. Switzerland never had terrorism, and they started pushing through all these privacy laws.
Yeah, it seems to me without a doubt that, never let a good crisis go to waste. Even in the United States today, especially in California and New York, who have the most draconian laws, they're still under a state of emergency. And even in Hawaii, we're under a state of emergency. The reason for the state of emergency is because you have emergency powers when you're under a state of an emergency. That's why every president is a wartime president. That's why there's a war on drugs, so that they can be a wartime president. Because when you're a wartime president, you don't need Congress you can start producing executive orders at a more rapid rate. You have less people looking over your shoulder because you're at a time of war. And so even though you're not at a time of war, you find something to be at war at. And then you can have the sweeping legislation that, allows you to raise money or bypass any sort of laws. And I don't know if it's like that in other countries, but I would imagine, and this is the pattern, that the process that takes us from, a republic into a dictatorship is just this long pathway of wartime. Why don't we have a war on poverty? How about that? How about here's one for you guys. Go ahead,
man. I was going to say, people are really easy to train in these situations. I remember after the 9/11 thing in the US, maybe it was after the shoe bomber, I can't remember, but all of a sudden you had to take your shoes off and put them through the x-ray machine.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being in another country, I think it was Switzerland, and they were kind of making fun of the US tourists in German at one point. I was listening to their conversation. They're like, look, they're so well trained. You don't have to ask them to just take their shoes off and put it through. And it wasn't even a rule there. They're just sort of habitually taking their shoes off and putting it through. And so I think the way forward, I'm not sure how to address this. I mean, there seems to be a lack of thinking. People do not like to think. People do not know how to think. And until we can fix that, people are going to be swayed by their emotions. And fear is always used to sway emotions. And I know this, like, look at the people around you. People watch comic book movies because they don't want to think. They want to turn their brains off for 2 minutes or 2 hours, because thinking is, I guess, painful to a lot of people. Something that people who do like to think.
It's confusing to a lot of people.
And to those people's credit, they were indoctrinated into a system that did not teach them how to think.
I agree with that. That's exactly it. I think it's when they are learning things in that phase, you're not taught how to think. So you wanna keep certain people there who will tell you where to go because it's easier. In a state of crisis, it's much easier. If you didn't have soldiers, like soldiers are basically our night guards, right? There is a joke. They are basically the first line of people who are going to die, so that they're like alarm system. They die and buy some time for you, and then you can get away. So you need some people who are going to say yes.
So, hey, Mr. Wizard, how did you learn how to think?
That's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer that off the top of my head, but I would say I was always pretty questionable of how things were going. Oh, I take that back. I know how to answer that. When I was 16 years old, I had a tragedy in my life. My little sister died in a car accident, and after that, I started looking at the world in a different way. And when people told me that something was true, there was much more of a bullshit meter that went up. Because if that was true, then why did this happen? Type idea. And nobody could give me good explanations of things. There was religion, there was people who said X, Y, and Z, but it all didn't sit well with me. And so I went on my own path, and I've been on it for a long time since.
Nice. How
I
about you,
think that
Kevin?
fits the title, right? Sorry for cutting you, Paul. But
That's okay.
tragedy,
Yeah,
right?
well,
Tragedy, and
indeed.
most of it, I feel like, has death in it in some way, which starts awakening us. Because death is, for the first time, I feel like, irreplaceable loss. So you have to question it, why it had to happen. Especially when in circumstances where the situation seems so good, at least according to scriptures, let's say, and then something happens, so you question God for the first time. But you can continue, Paul. Sorry.
No, it was just like when we, in our first conversation a couple Sundays ago, we were talking about language and all kinds of stuff, and I brought up that I felt that there was a lack of people weren't building foundations of knowledge in their lives. Me and George have had this conversation many times, and so the thinking process never really gets fully developed. And it seems like everybody here, knows how to form an opinion and actually knows how to think. And I'm just kind of wondering how everybody got to this point, in their lives, and maybe why some people don't.
That's very interesting.
I got
Good.
Ranga and I were talking on Friday, and I think Ranga does something that reminds me of something we probably all do or all have done or still do to this point. In our conversation, Ranga was telling me how he likes to make people feel uncomfortable, but by consequence, he makes himself feel uncomfortable. And like, that's the best way to think. Like, sometimes I bet you every one of us, probably even to this day, but definitely when you were a younger man, you were doing all kinds of things that made people feel uncomfortable, which made you feel uncomfortable, which forced you to have to think about what the hell you were doing or why the hell that person was treating you a certain way. And I think that fits this idea of thinking. Like, if you get a weird vibe from somebody, or say you say something to someone that makes them feel uncomfortable, all of a sudden you're like, hey, did I just say something bad? Why is this person looking at me? Do they think I'm why? Because I got long hair? What, you don't like me because of what I said? All these questions start popping up in your head. And like, that's the beginning, the foundation of critical thinking is like, why? What, you're mad at that because I said that? Why? It's this question of why. And some people feel so uncomfortable. Yeah, self-reflection.
I think it is the question of why, but I think, why is buried so deep, especially, after you're indoctrinated for years and years and years, it's to the point where a lot of places people aren't allowed to ask why. You don't ask why you go to church. You don't ask why mom and dad take you here. You don't ask why they said to do this. You don't ask this, because you learn that when I ask why, there's consequences. And so you get beat down from asking why our entire lives. And then eventually, I think all of us got to the point where, why became much more important than anybody else's reasoning for why not. And I think that kind of, I think that propels people forward. When that why gets bigger than the why not is, something that's important. And then, that triggers that self-reflection, that path, that inward journey.
Yeah, I think why is buried underneath discipline and respect and authority.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have to dig down to find why. You have to dig down to find the reason why. And it's buried under respect. It's buried under division. It's buried under respect. Like, and it's tough to dig it up because people don't want to dig it up. But and it's scary.
Well,
Like,
it hurts people.
Yes.
You're gonna
Yes.
you're gonna have conflict.
Yeah.
Personal experiences, many of them. But yeah, you're gonna end up in conflict, especially with people you love and actually did respect, or still even do respect. But yet you're still asking why, because something really doesn't add up, and it's just not making sense. And you have to ask that why, because eventually you get to that tipping point. And sometimes you're going to lose those relationships because you ask why.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It's really uncomfortable.
It's like you ask why enough times and you realize that nobody has an answer to it.
Nope.
You ask it enough times, you're like, shit.
You know,
Like,
it's a-
oh shit, yeah.
Did you guys have this thing as a kid? You think adults have it figured out, and you grow to become adult, and you don't know there is no distinctive point where
I
you
think
become adult.
I think most kids have that perception, and I don't
Yeah.
think most people grow up. And so I think most people walking around are still kids with that perception. They still appeal to authority. They still look at, if it's not mom and dad, it's the government, it's the police officer, it's the doctor, it's the what have you in their life that is some position of authority that they've just relegated their reasoning and rational ability to.
It's the expert. They know
It's
why.
the expert.
Yeah.
Well,
And
we were
whichever-
talking about this thing about divine right, and to me it's like way back when, largely, existed because people didn't ask. People didn't have like
Nice point.
that sort of like questioning of authority or
Well, you weren't allowed to either. You would end up on a stake, or you would end up burned,
sure.
or there was consequences to asking why that are a bit more harsh these days, or than these days.
Yeah, right.
I think
I was just going to say, thanks for bringing that up. That was actually one of the points I wanted to get to in that whole divine right. Way to tie it back, Paul.
I think that this is kind of a big difference between the East and the West too. It seems to me, and I don't know this, but it seems to me that the Eastern traditions have more of a sense of saving face and having harmony, and want to have less of a debate about the right or wrong, and rather choose to just disagree without arguing in front of people because it can bring shame or disrespect like that. Where in the Western tradition, it seems like people are willing to argue in front of each other, not to be rude or disrespectful, but just to prove a point. What do you guys think?
Sometimes to be rude and disrespectful too.
Sure.
Yeah. But there is some sort of impetus between the East and the West when you have, there seems like honor. If you ask the definition of honor to anybody in the West these days, you're going to get probably not a close definition to the thing. But if you ask people in the East, they're very honor bound to families, institutions, religions, just social impetus. So I think there is a distinct difference in that, and that would probably hark back to our last conversation about language.
What do you think, Ranga? You seem to be disagreeable at times, and you were born in India. Are you more disagreeable than people in your family, or what is your take on argumentation?
It goes back to 2-3 things you said. Why people do not think right, because of fear of authority or discipline, and those points were not just random words. Everything has happened in my life that I wasn't able to talk out loud until like 2-3 years back. Like I literally had a heavy public fear, and it was mostly because in India schools are based on the French military system. So first thing is discipline. And one of the funny things I have been thinking about last year is that they taught us march past. I do not know why that was there. There was a NCC, National Cadet something, and they train you to with things, but they weren't sending us to war or anything. But this was there in schools. Instead of kids having playtime, which was limited to 40 minutes a week, we did this for 4 hours, right? And you cannot talk back. One good thing was I was interested in going there because I wanted to fit in. I was too small at that point, so they didn't take me. So that turned to be a little bit of sadness. But the question came, why did they not take me? Right? And then I still didn't have an understanding because this why question I couldn't convey to a person of authority, right? So, for example, in my caste or ritual, they have a white thread they wear around the body. I'm curious. I asked my dad why. There is no answer. Like, you will understand it one day, right? Because I do not have the answer. It's not
Right.
they don't.
You'll understand it later.
You
Yeah.
cannot confront them. They are not, because they have not talked to themselves. People meet you only as deeply as they have met themselves. I really agree, because I feel like many people that I've met back in India are very shallow with respect to not having shallow ideas or something. It's just they've not done anything with themselves. So that's how they interact with people too. So there is no honesty from my dad to tell me that he doesn't know, so that it could have been a joint thing of finding out why it existed. But all those kind of helped me to question those, right? And I honestly had so much fear in talking to people. My legs would start shaking considerably. I couldn't do anything. Right? I would stay stay in the stage. My voice will shiver, and all of that because there is a person I know of authority sitting in the audience. If it was just my friends, it was much different, right? And all these things I had to break, but all the situation is what caused me to break it, right? It's like what you said about traditions, George, last time. So wouldn't you say tradition has been successful because those are the things that made me question it and let's say get away from it or something? So in that way, yeah, nothing has positive or a negative effect. It's just there, and just it's interaction of different things happening. It's a dynamic play, right? In interaction of multiple things happening, so it leads to one result. But in this thing, I was watching The Good Place today. Sorry for jumping from that, but they were questioning about free will and determinism. So there are so many things that appears deterministic, and there is always a question of free will. But again, all the things behind this is, as you said, George, the question of why. Why is very crucial.
That is
Nothing
crucial.
should. I'm done. Nothing should be taken at the face value. Everything can be doubted. Every single thing.
Yeah, I think that you can. You know what, Kevin? You have a friend that has read Jeb McKenna and become enlightened, and
We're skipping a few steps, but yeah. Go ahead, continue.
yeah, okay. So I wanted to tie this to Ranga and I were talking about the idea of being there, and he was asking. I'll have him sum it up, but the way I see it, remember, Ranga, do you remember our conversation when you were asking, like, what is the push to get there? Do you remember us talking about that on Friday?
Push to get there or push to just action? What is the thing
like,
that pushes us to move?
Okay, what is the thing that pushes us to move? Because and there was a because in there, and the because was like, no matter what, there's no real reason to do anything. I think Kevin's friend, maybe Kevin can tell us about his friend who thinks he's become enlightened or may have become enlightened, and then I think it'll feed into the ideas that you were talking about. Can you tell us that story, Kevin, about your friend and why he thinks the way he does?
I think, first of all, we have to make some definitions, as
Yes.
in what is the definition of enlightenment?
Okay,
what is an
good
enlightened person? Because I don't think anyone universally agrees on that. And typically, if you read the scriptures, old yogic texts and so forth, an enlightened person is somebody who is experiencing bliss 24/7 and is fully in awareness and has dissolved ego and is love and compassion. Whereas this guy, Jeb McKenna, he defines enlightenment as the destruction of the false self, and that there is no self left, and the removal of all emotional attachments. So my friend has followed this path, and he's literally, with effort, tried to destroy his own ego and his false self, as he calls it, and is in this way merged with the dream state, but not attached to it. So I guess those are the two different definitions of it.
If he's your friend, doesn't he still have an
according to so in terms of, you had a question about motivation, and the motivation there is hatred of falsity, to destroy everything false, including the self.
What's false?
Everything, basically.
So denying reality.
You accept reality as an illusion.
It's the question
Boil
monks
it down,
asked, right?
Mr. Let's hear it.
Awareness versus appearance. There is only awareness, and everything else is appearance.
It's like the monks asking, how do I overcome the desire of killing all my desires?
Right. Or
And
you
there's
just
one
ask, who
final.
am I? You ask, who am I forever? That's the practice.
Yeah.
But then, so that discounts the things like love.
Yes.
So,
Well, he says
so
there are two types of love.
compassion,
There's like,
the things that we typically hold as good virtues, right?
yeah, because there's no good or bad. Everything is.
Well, there's no good or
Everything.
bad. It's all relative. Yeah.
And most forms of love are fearful attachments, according to this philosophy.
Oh,
I disagree.
I disagree.
All right. Yeah. So my take on this whole position is actually fairly similar. I'm no absolutes. There is no such thing as good or bad. There's no right or wrong. What's right for me is not necessarily right for you. Truth is a relative perspective. In order for us to know the entirety of truth, we would have to have access to everything that's ever happened at all times in order to say that is actually true. And we are incapable of such a thing. So I approach my philosophy from there is no absolutes in that sense, but that does not degrade from the experience, because we are all here living an experience, and to deny that experience is to deny, everything that we're doing. Does that make you enlightened? Yeah, it might in some regard, I suppose, if you actually think about it, because you're not going to give a shit about what's going on around you. And one could consider that enlightened. However, in my perspective, I would much more rather see the smiles on the faces of you gentlemen. I would much more interact with the people around me. I would much more have love with my dog, who, has nothing but joy to bring to my life. And I think denying that there is value in those aspects is to deny this experience. And if you were to deny this experience, then why are you here?
But
I think we can agree that dogs are enlightened beings.
Oh, yeah, I would agree. They got it all figured out as far as I'm concerned.
Additional love.
I think in one definition, as Kevin said, right, enlightened being in a state of bliss, again, it all involves definition. So without defining, I would like to think it's a person who's completely non-reactive and accepting of all things that are happening, right? In that sense, I don't think they are denying the experience to go somewhere. They are just in complete sync with the experience, where there is no narrative of what's happening. So they're one with the experience. But there is no choice. Like as you said, right? I would rather sit with here and have this video. I agree, but I think it's like a choice, right?
But
Without
if you're,
the choice,
but
yes.
if you're one with the experience, that would necessitate that you are a part of said experience. You would, be, experiencing the experience would, otherwise you're not a part of the experience. So for personal story, when I first kind of, went on my philosophy journey and discovered this for myself, I found an exceptional joy in my life. I was in Costa Rica. I had no responsibilities. I owed nothing to nobody. And I was on a hilltop I could have sat there forever in bliss. But then there was that little bit of inkling in my mind that said, hey, everybody else is in bliss. There's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of people that you love that aren't doing well. And so for you to remain here is a selfish act. And I would think the annihilation of attachment is the utmost selfish act one could make. That's not to say that, by detaching yourself from things, you cannot have perspective, and you gain perspective. And I think that is the path to enlightenment. However, to entirely deny that attachment is perfectly selfish.
But I think the journey is about finding that self, right? It's not with the goal of denying the self.
It's
But as
finding
Kevin
the
said-
self. it's
Yeah.
finding the self, but it's not being selfish. Once you find yourself, you are now a beacon. Now you're a light. Now you're are something to lead people to.
I don't
So,
think
hey,
you can.
Kevin,
Yeah.
what was his reason for doing this?
My friend or the author?
Your friend.
I think he'd been on a very, very long journey, and multi-decade perhaps. And he just encountered this guy who spoke to him, because I guess there's a lot of writing that says, look into the heart, the emotions are the way. And this guy says, no, the mind is the way. Emotions are there to deceive you. And my friend is a very intellectual guy, so that appealed to his sense of how the world works. So basically the idea is use your mind to destroy falsity. And I just think his writing appealed. Yeah. Oh yeah, he would say there's absolutely no such thing as balance. He's like, you have to be like aggressively, like obsessed, single-minded, don't care if you survive the process, like go into the deepest, darkest holes of yourself and just till you're done.
Even there's not. Oh, sorry, Paul.
So he talks about this but in his methodology. Discuss this.
I don't know what exactly he did. Yeah. Well, the author recommends just writing constantly, like just always just deconstructing yourself through writing. I don't know. I think so. I assume my friend did the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes I wonder if it's backwards. Like, maybe you can't be enlightened unless you have attachment. Like, the things you recognize in other people are the things you recognize about yourself. Like, if you see someone is like, have you ever seen someone and be like, I know what this fucker's doing. This guy's trying to manipulate me. I know what he's doing. You know how you know that? Because you do it. Or you know how, like, you know what this girl's doing? I see what she's doing. She's going to be with this person to get back at me. That's the only reason you can see that is because that's something you see yourself doing. So if you really want to know yourself, you have to have been attached to these other people because they're like a mirror for you. And the more attachments you've had in your life, the more fuller you are. It's like maybe when you attach to something, then you detach, you take part of that with you. Or maybe you can only untouch from them because you've learned the lesson about yourself from them. Maybe
right. But we have to
the
define what the self is here again. We're getting tricky with semantics. Like,
That's
what
a good
is
point.
the self, right? This guy is proposing, and a lot of other writers actually propose that the self is just the thing that is aware, just the consciousness, and everything else is like a balloon. Inside the balloon is the self or no self, and your personality and your persona are paper mache newspapers that you throw on it.
Sure, but then what's the purpose?
No, there's no purpose. And he would even say that.
So there's no purpose, so we should all just kill ourselves and forget about this thing, right?
I think that's the important question.
The book is like the only real argument against suicide is that if you fail, you have a big medical bill.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny.
I think that's
You
I think
go
that's
to jail as
common.
well, right?
I would contend just in all of this that balance it still is the thing. Even when you go to the deep dark, even if you go to the depths of space, there is a balance there. There's an equilibrium between all of the things that are around it, the environment that it's encompassing or encompassed by. So I think even in ultimate attachment, you still necessitate the need to find a balance with that attachment to the attachment, and I think that is the path to enlightenment. If I were to put my 2 cents in.
Yeah, check out the guy. I enjoy his books. He's pretty funny sometimes. So if you're interested in these topics and want to have a mental debate with him, check him out.
Will do.
What Dan asks, is it when you talk about self as awareness, would you say could you use the word observer?
Yeah, it's that thing that's just looking. And I mean, you can see it sometimes even if you try to recall memories. Like if you close your eyes and you remember something, that feeling of being there and seeing the ageless part of you. That's what he's talking about. Absent all of the culture and thoughts and opinions. There's this thing that's just ageless and always there.
Does everybody have an observer, or am I other people's observer as well?
I have no idea if anybody else has an observer. That's the other point. I can't say if you're a real person or if you're conscious, right? But I assume that.
This is all a dream, Kevin. This is all a dream.
It's all a dream.
That's Biggie Smalls right there, the great philosopher. Wow. Yeah. It's interesting to think about. I always think of Albert Camus when I think of suicide, right? Have you read that book, The Stranger, where like he just goes to court and like, you know, maybe he killed somebody, maybe he didn't, but no one really cares. I guess you could interpret that like different ways, but yeah, I would go with balance. I think that seems to be the best pathway for an individual to move through this life, because sometimes you're high, sometimes you're low, but the truth is you're probably neither of those things. You're probably always in the middle, right? A good way to look at yourself, at least me, is that I always think to myself, you know what, there's a lot of people who are way smarter and better than me, and then there's a lot of people who are way worse and worse off than me. And that's usually the truth, right?
Well, I would also just kind of lament that with, we don't exist without balance. Without this equilibrium of balance between, the sun, the earth, the biosphere, all of the things that are existing to enable this conversation, we're not here. Can you put up Dan's question again?
Yeah.
Because I thought of something kind of interesting. Is it awareness or will? And I think this is a really interesting question to me. And anyway, it strikes me as, is this everybody is God, or there's a single individual God?
Maybe there's both.
Or can it be like in the Hindu tradition where there's like a sort of master god and these little sub gods responsible for different areas?
Right. And that's, so yeah, I think that's a very interesting conversation. Maybe.
I think we're all like Voltron. Like we got to come together to be that one God.
Well, in that kind of analogy, there's a lot to be said about together we're stronger, right? We're able to hash out a lot of different things. If we were all to try to pick up a rock together, we could definitely pick up a larger rock than we could individually.
It's a good point. It's a very good point. What about, let me just grab the wheel and take it this way. Like, I've been on my mushroom trips lately, I've been having this reoccurring theme. I'm pretty sure I'm an alien. It's like, just think about this for a minute. Like, wouldn't it make more sense? Like, just think about how crazy the world is, and we think of God all the time. Yeah, go ahead. What do you got?
Oh, I'm actually on the page. I in my recent mushroom trips, I've kind of had a similar experience. So I'll leave it at that. I'll let you go. Sorry.
Okay.
But
So
it depends.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna add that part where, again, it comes to the part where we put a boundary and say this is home and we are not from here, and that makes us alien.
That's a good point.
I feel like sometimes different places of awareness gets trapped in different level of consciousness with psychedelics. Sometimes state specific memory starts coming back, so it's more redundant. So the stories are nice, I think, but I truly believe it's just the awareness behind it. And God, in that sense, would be just the resistant against which the quark is making its first motion, and that's it.
I would agree with you until I weigh that against anthropology and history.
In what way?
In what way? So, are you familiar with the Sumerian Kings list?
Mm-hmm.
Say that
So,
again?
the Sumerian Kings list.
Yes.
So, if you look at the Sumerian Kings list, their calculations of math and everything are pretty exact with just about everything. But the reign of those kings were in, I think the first one was a couple 100,000 years, and the next one was 40-some thousand years. The next one after that was 20 or 12 or something. And they had a range, and I think it accounts to some, correct me if I'm wrong, George, but I think it's close to 400,000 years of reigning kings that they recorded. Now, for people who are articulating math in such a very specific manner that they're able to, everything else we've translated is exact, why would this be fanciful? That's just one piece of evidence. And when you start to look at, older things on the world, like megalithic sites around the world, every continent around this world has these megalithic sites that are lower on the geographic stratosphere, if you will, than the buildings above them. What we call our ancient societies, like the Incas, the Mayans, and all of these things. These are societies built upon these ancient structures that are much more precise. You have these polygonal walls all over the world that you still can't fit human hair into after thousands and thousands of years of geologic movement. And you have things like Baalbek in Lebanon and many other places around the world where it looks like there was some sort of culture that had outdid us in technology to things that we can't even recreate today. Where did that come from? Where did it go? So I think I don't think it's just a cut and dry, like the perception of the trip, if you will. I think there's a bit more to that story.
I've been reading that, and I've watched a documentary on the Sumerian gods, and my question comes about thinking about God is from this sentence where, what's the difference between an atheist and a religious person? The religious person says the earth couldn't have just come from nothing. A God has to be there to create it. And atheist asks, who's created the God, right? So relatively, these we are going in yugas, right, as Hindus describe it, or in mega cycles. So there are things happen where intelligence rises and it goes down, and it attains a plateau. It goes, hits a rock bottom and comes back up. I think that happens. And if they were God, why are they not still here? So it depends on how we define God, right? So relatively, they could be a different creature.
I don't think it's God at all. I don't think it's God at all. Most people would call magic, just technology that they don't understand. Most people would attribute God to something similar. And if I showed up 2,000 years ago with a cell phone and there was GPS satellites, I would be God.
Yeah.
There's no question. I think this was just a different technological age.
Yes.
And, where that technological age came from, I think, is an interesting question, especially when you start to collaborate that evidence with things like genetic records. 40,000 some years ago, you had Cro-Magnon come onto the genetic record, who was a fully formed human with a pronested chin, which means that they were agricultural in some sense. Essentially, that's kind of the accepted science. But they came from kind of nowhere, whereas you had these Neanderthals and other things that were similar to, we traced those back to Australopithecus back in the day. But then there was all of a sudden this new species, essentially. And then you also have things genetically like Rh negative phenotypes, right? So are you familiar with those? So Rh negative is, there's certain people that have the Rh negative component where if they breed with somebody who doesn't, the baby will actually abort.
Okay. So it's a very rare number of people who have it? Or
my daughter, my wife is Rh negative and I'm Rh positive. And when our daughter was born, like there was a real chance they had to go in intensive care, and like she was under this crazy watch and stuff like that. And we were all scared for a while. Obviously she made it, but what happens is the body attacks, like the Rh negative sees that being in her body as a foreign invader because the blood type is different. And because the mother's nutrients and umbilical cord and blood is feeding that child, it will begin to attack it at a certain point in time, or it has at least the opportunity to do so. Paul, you told me a story one time about a holiday that the Hawaiians celebrate about potentially coming from the Pleiades. Can you share that with everybody?
The Makahiki season.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of coincides with like harvest and basically begins with the Pleiades rising as the sun is setting. So Hawaiians would, like over here on Maui, go Haleakala and on top of Haleakala and watch for the Pleiades to rise when the sun was setting. And then that began the Makahiki season. Basically, no more war, be on your best behavior, time of celebration. And they thought that's because they were being watched by their ancestors, and that they come from the Pleiades. And then after the Pleiades sets as the sun is rising, then the back time to behaving poorly, basically, doing what they wanted to do as far as war goes. But the Hawaiians aren't the only ones that think they're from the Pleiades. A lot of cultures around the world, you know, would define their origins as being from the Pleiades. Isn't it? You guys know who Wayne Herschel is? You guys ever heard of that guy?
No.
They started star mapping, basically going around the globe and looking at ancient civilizations and the structures they built and how they were laid out. This goes back to like geographical location, Giza Plateau, Chichen Itza Tikal, all these different places around the world, and kind of laying out by satellite photos or airplane photos of these places, that they all kind of lay out in the design of the Pleiades, and that the ancient star, what the Egyptians called Ra, is actually a star 283, 271 that you cannot see with the naked eye when you look at the Pleiades. And that's where people come from.
Interesting.
That everybody had migrated from that star system. So you look at like ancient Egyptian like hieroglyphs, and you see the hunter and the bull and the blazing star of Ra. Well, if you look in the sky, you see like Orion's belt is shining through, like the 7 stars of Orion point to the 5 stars of Taurus, the 3 stars of Orion point to the 5 stars of Taurus, that point to the 7 stars of the Pleiades, which point to that star, the star of Ra. So it's kind of a symbolic thing with especially like an ancient Egyptian culture, where the hunter is actually shooting through the horns of the bull and aiming towards the Pleiades. And there's a lot of maps you can look up, ancient civilizations that actually are laid out that way and have similar type of stories about the Pleiades. Look it up.
And a lot of scriptures too. Like if you look at the book
Right.
of Enoch, he gets taken into space, and there's all these people going to the Temple Mount where they communicate. God is always in the sky, and the tablets came from the sky. And if you look at the Muslim tradition, when they go and they dance around I forgot the name of the sacred cube that they dance around, but like that came from space. Like that's a meteorite. And like it seems to me in so much religious connotation that everyone is looking up to see the gods. And there's people.
Not just them. Like if you look at the level 1 tracing board in like the Masons, it's the same thing. It's laid out in different levels of human migration to planet Earth.
Right.
Primitive migration all the way into the 3 big migrations up, started 200,000 years ago up to about 50,000 years ago, when the last great migration of people came. Solomon's ladder, is on there. The Pleiades, the Star of David, all symbolic stuff that points to, the belief that humankind may have originated.
And
It's not just cultures. A lot of people, if you look at even like Stonehenge, and Stonehenge has been kind of destroyed over the years. People didn't know what it was; they just saw the major parts of it. But there are a lot of other pieces to that too, which also lay out, ironically, to the same pattern as the stars of the Pleiades. Kind of interesting. First time I ever read something and was like, wow, this possibility of, sounds more plausible than a lot of other stories that I've heard people tell about the origins of man.
And you're back to bloodlines and divine right.
But Taranga's earlier point is, where did they go?
You're looking at them like that.
Right.
This is the answer to Fermi's paradox. Look in the mirror. Hey Fermi, look in the mirror. That's them. They're right there. Where's everybody at? They're right there in the mirror. Like we are the aliens. Like if you think about it, like why are we warring so much? Like we're fighting over resources the same way an alien species would come down to this earth and mine all the resources. Like what's our affinity with gold? Like why do we love this metal so much? Like,
Well, I mean, people think that we were originally brought here as part of that migration that I was discussing to mine gold.
Well, if you look at like the Sumerian text, we were created
right
to do that, right? And we're not the first iteration of that, according to the Sumerian text. We're the second or third, if I recall, Enki and Enlil. If you want to look it up, I don't have it off the top of my head, but essentially, the first ones were they didn't. I forget exactly what it is, but yeah, we're a couple iterations down the line.
Yeah, 3.
Oh, okay, you got it, Paul. Well, inform us, sir.
I thought you were just talking about that, about the migrations of people.
Yeah, they say the Garden of Eden. Like if you read Zecharia Sitchin, and I know he's been debated left and right, but if you look at the Garden of Eden, it's the same story that Sitchin puts forth in the Sumerian text, where they built like the gods came down here to mine all this gold, or they came down here to exploit the planet, and they got tired of working. They're like, we should just create a worker out of one of these beings that are here, and so they genetically engineer them. And they tried multiple ones. And if you look at the story of Adam and Eve, it reads like that. It reads like that. And the same story is in the Sumerian text, where they create these beings and they take the rib of one and they make a new one. Well, you can genetically engineer an organism. Like they're trying to regrow a mammoth right now by using CRISPR and finding the DNA inside the bone marrow, right?
No, they are doing it. They have successfully sequenced enough of the genome that they can marry it with an elephant.
Okay, so this gets me thinking too. Like if we continue to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, and we look at some of the kings list, and some of these kings reigned for thousands of years, and we factor in the fall of man, and then we think about there's a guy that was gosh dang it, I can't think of his name. I want to say the Lerner Lab, but I think that's wrong. Maybe it's called the Larimer Lab. There was a guy that was in the Chinese COVID lab that was whisked out of there. And he is like the head scientist at Harvard, and his name's David Larimer. And you guys can look him up, the Larimer Lab. And this guy, he's got all his work is on bioengineering, and he's trying to find these incredible ways to fuse technology, change the genome so you can last longer. And he was a huge part of that lab in Wuhan. And he recently won, even though he's supposed to be under investigation, you might go to prison.
Right.
Yeah, discredited. He just won like the what's that award people win for making weapons, but it's called a Peace Prize. The you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
It's the same thing that the guy won for nuclear weapons and Barack Obama won. But anyways, he just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And here he is making a virus that maybe killed people or maybe is experimenting on people. But maybe the reason he really won that award is because he's found a way to successfully fundamentally change the human genome. And I think
so that really made COVID. Is that what you're saying? This guy's like credited with doing that?
Well, that's going to be George is going to get some hate mail.
Listen, all I'm saying is go look up the guy's Harvard lab. Look up David Larimer's lab in Harvard. Everybody watching this, do it right now. If I could do it, I would. But if you look up Larimer Lab, you'll see all this guy's patents and all this stuff this guy's working on. And then if you look harder, you'll say like, dude, what the hell was this guy doing in Wuhan? And why is this not all over the front page news? Like, here is one of the top. Yeah, because he was doing something. Like there's a connection there that people don't want everyone talking about, is what I'm saying. And I would highly recommend people look it up. It's fascinating.
I'm sure.
That's the case.
I think people are still arguing if they should have their masks on or not, so I don't think they care about this yet.
That's a fair point.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
a
you
fair
know,
point.
yeah, it's there. I don't know, in my height of my hallucinogenic trip, like I just felt as if, and maybe this goes to wrong point. Maybe this is me seeing myself for the first time, so it feels alien. Maybe this is me seeing a side of myself that I don't normally see, so it's alien to me. However, I felt as if I was being told my purpose here on earth is to help out as many people as I can. Like my purpose on earth is that I'm part of a long history of people that are here to fundamentally change the planet for the better. And then my destiny is to not become some like wealthy, well-known person that chases the dreams of the average person. My destiny is to be among people like me that are hidden here to make the world better. And I realize how freaking crazy ego that sounds, but why not? Why can't that be a good destiny? Why shouldn't aliens be telling me that?
I mean, they think voice, George, is like a leftover of like, from our early existence of receiving information so that we can go to work in the mines from a higher being without actually, the audio communication, like actually physically using words and all the rest of that stuff.
I feel like it was the logos, man. I feel like maybe it's because I read way too much old classic stories about this stuff, but I felt like it was the logos.
You read too many novels, for one.
Okay. This is going to bring up a great point. Can somebody here please tell Paul the importance of reading fiction? I'll start with you, Kevin Holt.
I don't have an opinion on this, honestly.
Okay.
Well, it goes to its motivation, right? It goes back to what we were talking about with language last time.
I think fiction is important because people in real situations get let their emotions go. They don't have a detached way of observing the thing. They still have a worldly sense of these are real events, so I should be angered about it. I should be saving it. But set in a fictional world, I think they're able to give way to understand the meaning of why it's being said.
I don't need a teddy bear.
I agree to the point that it's a mechanism of perception. I also think it's a bit more than that. I think when you're talking about fiction and things like this, this is an imaginative process. These are people who are drawing from their environments, the Akashic records. In my personal hypothesis of how this all works, the field of information, where there is the infinite set of possibilities. And when you draw from that, and even if it's fiction to what we're talking about in our reality, that fiction is just as much a part of that grander whole as anything that we would consider nonfiction.
I think that it's all fiction. I mean, whenever you tell a story, like you're not telling the real story. You're only telling one side of the story.
You go, alien.
That's right. That's why I'm here. This is why I'm here. Okay, let's take an example of something like Brave New World or something like Animal Farm. Here's a fictional story of what can happen, but it might also be a story of what's actually happening. So anytime you read a point of fiction, especially really good fiction, it paints a picture that may or may not have happened or may not already happen.
It's almost 45 minutes of Marvel comics on the big screen.
That's fiction too. I mean, I guess I have to contend with both of those, but I think that there is a difference between good fiction and bad fiction. The same way there's a difference between a good woman and a bad woman, or a good man and a bad man.
That's going to be relative to you.
Okay, well, here's this. You know how you tell a difference between if you live in a city that has tall buildings and people live in the city, do you know how to tell the difference between a good building and a bad building if you want to live in one? A good building has a doorman. A bad building has a man at the door.
I mean, to me, like, it's just a really
Yeah.
long way of making a point.
I didn't hear that, Paul. I'm sorry.
Fiction to me is just like a really long way of making a point.
But you know, in that long path, you know, there's perspectives to that point that people don't always see when they're encountered with it just in day-to-day reality.
Agreed. I think that you can. I think if like I read this guy Brandon Sanderson, who's got a series of books called like the Words of Radiance, and it's this guy builds a world that you can participate in if you're willing to let your imagination do it. And in that world, he brings up points that may be idealistic, points that may be happening in our world, and it allows you to see your world from a different point of view. In a way, I think fiction is a hill in the mountain of dreams, if that kind of makes sense. Like you're standing on a hill in the mountain of dreams, looking
That's
down
definitely
at this imaginary. Yes. You know, you're looking down at this world that you live in from a different perspective because you've been transported to a different part of reality. And you can only see this perspective from a different part of reality. And the only way you can get there is through imagination. And that to me is what fiction can do for you if you're willing to suspend belief in reality for a little bit. And if you think about that, we always do that. We may not be aware of it, but we're constantly suspending our belief, which brings me back to it's all fiction, man. You know, and even the ability to write fiction, I think, helps with the ability in language to explain the world you live in. Because let's face it, sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. And you know, who would have ever thought that us 5 people from different time zones would be getting together to help change the world for the better?
We're in the same time zone, George.
Wait, is that what we are doing?
So you should read
Sorry,
fiction.
wrong group, guys.
Wrong is like I didn't know we signed up for that.
You see, you haven't read the end of the story yet, but I've already got it halfway written out.
Oh, wonderful.
I think it's important to
No,
read fiction.
It's the same thing from poetry or music, right?
Right, but that's
Again,
fiction
forms
in,
of fiction,
in essence,
right?
right? Because it's just a depiction of something that's not real. You don't walk down the street and hear music playing behind you, even though that happens in movies, and it would be kind of cool if you had your own soundtrack.
Mm.
George, you said suspend
bunch
our
of
belief of.
That's right. There you go.
George, you said suspend our belief of reality, right? Do we call this part of life reality? Because like maybe in dream, if we die, we won't, be actually dead. But in this real life, according to stories we might be actually dead if we, is that why we call it reality? So in that case, if we suspend our fear of dying, would everything become real then instead of fiction?
Wow.
Interesting question.
I think we run into the inefficiency of or the insufficiency of language there.
Oh no.
Right? Like
He draws
I think so. I mean, you can suspend your belief in reality and live in your own world. Sometimes I think that maybe I am a manifestation of a false reality in a homeless guy's world, like I don't know if I exist sometimes. Maybe I am the thing he's laughing at and I have to act it out. I'm not sure.
The key word in
feel?
there is I am.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
Sure. Do you feel?
Deeply.
Then you are.
I like to think so.
Oh, well, you exist.
Yeah.
Right.
The trick is, can you change your environment just by telling yourself a different story? I want to share this story with you guys. Here's something that, like, here's something that happened to me like a few years ago, and it fundamentally changed my life. So I was on my journey, and I was reading a lot of books, and I was taking a lot of modafinil, and I was kind of at the end of my rope. Like I was just getting kind of, I was falling in this trap of monotony where I just get up, go to work, come home, get up, go to work, come home. And I just felt like I didn't have a whole lot going for me. I didn't have a whole lot to live for. And I just felt like a drone a little bit. And so one day I'm on the road in my UPS truck and I'm driving and my phone starts blowing up. Like sometimes someone will call you once and you're like, I don't know what it is. So they'll call you again and then they think maybe the second time you'll answer because they keep calling your phone. So my phone rings and I'm driving, so I can't really pick it up, but I look at it and I'm like, I don't know who that is. And then it rings again and I'm like, I don't know who it is. So I keep silencing it. And this goes on for like, the person called like, no joke, like 15 times. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then like, so by this time I'm off the road and then my wife calls me and I see it's her and she's like, George, is there something you want to tell me? And I'm like, yeah, someone keeps blowing up my phone. Is everything all right? And she goes, yeah, there's some people here like from the CIA that came to the house. I'm like, shut up. What are you talking about? And she goes, dude, they showed me their card and they tried to come in the door. Like my wife and my wife's mom were living with us at the time. Or my wife's mom was staying with us at the time. And she goes, yeah, my mom had to she had her hand on the door, like, get out. And then like the guy just gave us his card. They said that they're looking for you. And I'm like, dude, are you messing with me? And she goes, no, I'm not at all. And then as soon as that part of the conversation goes, my phone rings again. Like they'll call her because I have the multiple callers, whatever. I'm like, okay, it's these people. I'm gonna see what the hell's going on. I love you. I'm okay. I got nothing to hide. I love you. I'll call you back in a minute. And so I click off with her, and then I click on, and they're like, Mr. Monty, and I'm like, this is him. They're like, this is Agent. I forgot his name. Agent something CIA, and I'm like, what? Like, okay, how can I help you? And the guy's like, I need to see you today. And I'm like, how about we meet maybe tomorrow or something? I'm like, I'm at work right now. And he goes, how about I come to your work? And I'm like, that's a horrible idea. You should never come to my work. Like, I think that's a bad idea. And he's like, well, listen, it's important that I see you today. I'm like, what's this about? And he's like, well, I can't tell you over the phone. And I'm like, are you messing with me? Like, how do I know you're even real? And he's like, look, I am who I say I am. I just came to your house. And then like, I kind of know, I don't know if he's the real, I know he came to my house. My wife's telling me. So I'm like, okay. I'm like, and I'm scared on my mind. I'm like, did I fucking do something? I'm like, is it because I've been like buying all these books about dissident thinkers that want to take over the government maybe? Or, like I just bought all these books about technological slavery and the Unabomber maybe. And I'm like, that's not that. And I'm like, then I bought in a bunch of like modafinil offline. I'm like, that's stupid. They don't care about that. So then I'm like, I got nothing to hide. I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah, meet me. This is where I'm at. I'm going to be at UH. Why don't you come and meet me? He's like, all right, where at? I'm like, meet me at this address. I'll be waiting for you. And so I'm thinking to myself like, fuck, man, this is really strange, dude. And so I park my truck and I walk over to where I was supposed to meet, and I'm sitting there waiting for him. And these two younger kids kind of show up. They're younger than me. And I'm like, these guys don't look fucking CIA agents. And so they walk up to me and they do the guy, hey, how's it going? Shows me his badge. And I'm like, son of a bitch, this guy's got a badge. And he has a manila folder with him. And I'm like, how can I help you, man? And he's like, take a look at these pictures. And so I'm looking through these pictures. And like, there's pictures of a guy. There's like two guys in there. Dude, I have never seen him in my life. And so I'm looking through these pictures. And as I'm looking through the pictures, I'm thinking, dude, is this guy looking at me, looking at these pictures, looking for something else? My mind's just racing. I'm like, what the fuck? And he's like, do you know these guys? And I'm like, dude, I've never seen. I go through all of them, I hand it back, and I go, I've never seen these guys in my entire life, man. And he's like, well, can you explain how this guy has your ID then? And I'm like, I'm thinking, and I go, yep, I can. I got pickpocketed at the mall a month ago, man. Someone grabbed my wallet. If you don't believe me, you can go to Macy's because they have the guy on camera because he stole my wallet and then he tried to buy a watch with my credit card. And then I see the automatically see the guys get deflated, right? They're like, oh, like they thought they had something on me. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I got him. And so he's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, does that guy have my license and my ID? Because I'd like to get that stuff back. And they're like, yeah, he's got it. But we don't know if we're gonna be able to get it back. I'm like, what's this guy? What has he done? I mean, you guys are trying to track him down. You're with the CIA apparently. Like, what has he done? And they're like, he's up to some pretty bad stuff, man. And we can't really talk to you about that right now. But if we can get your ID back, we'll get it to you. And like that was the end of the discussion, Wow. It was kind of a trip. And so, but here's where the work came in. Like, so then they leave, and I think to myself, like, wow, that was so weird, man. Like for a minute, like I felt like I was like this undercover criminal, like I had done something crazy. I felt like I was. And then part of me is like, fuck, I think I was smarter than those guys, man. I think I could have done something. I bet you I could have, if I tried to, I think I could have fooled those guys. I came up with that pretty quick. I bet you I could have fooled them. And that thought stayed with me. And when I got home that night, like I kept thinking more about it. And I'm like, you know what? Like, even though that was scary, it felt pretty exhilarating. Like for a minute in my mind, I was like, and in those guys' mind, even more importantly, those guys thought that I was some international criminal, man. And you know what? If I was, it wouldn't have been for the crimes they thought. It would have been for something way cooler than that. Like I would have been like robbing banks across the world. I would have done something crazy. And then it just stayed with me. I'm like, okay, I thought I was that guy. They thought I was that guy. I thought I was that guy. I played around with that idea. Fuck, I could be that guy. I could live an exciting life as a international lunatic that gets away with stuff. And that's way more exciting than George, the UPS driver. And I kept that idea in my mind. And I was like, what else would I do if I could do that? Well, I'd probably live in a giant house. I'd probably have a super fucking awesome car. You know what? My wife probably wouldn't have to work a full-time job. My mind blew up and it opened up this area in my mind for me to imagine things. And like, ever since then, it really blew up this concept of imagining myself as something greater than I've ever thought of. And that was the first catalyst I've ever had with it. And like, I think the reason I'm telling you this is like, that is a fiction I told myself that changed my life. And I think that fiction, be it something that happens to you or a story you tell yourself about yourself, can manifest incredible changes in your life.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
Sounds like a 12-year-old fantasy.
I was gonna say this is George telling us all we're on the list.
By association. Yeah.
I wasn't guilty. And you know what? I would say it was more like a 28-year-old fantasy, Paul. Like, I think that was a little bit cooler than that. Like, I didn't turn into an animal. I didn't have superpowers. I couldn't shoot X-ray vision.
Sort of like, Austin Powers, superhero.
I was going for James Bond, but I'll go with that. He's, something like that. But the point is, it's still a fiction, and it may not be as fiction as the Incredible Hulk, but it is a fiction. And it is a fiction I told myself, but I think that's important, man. I think that shows the importance of imagination and creativity and fantasy, man. Yeah, why not? And fantasy.
How much time did you spend on that?
I still think about it, man. It's amazing. What's that?
You should have went to the movies.
Well, then I would have lived someone else's fantasy. They would have put someone else's stuff in my head.
Instead of spending years like thinking about this, you could have got it all done in about an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have had the changes that I had. You know what I mean? Like, this is my movie. This is I'm 009.5. You know what I mean?
The hero's journey imagined.
Yeah. Which leads its way into having real changes in your life, right? Like, you can't go anywhere without a linguistic pathway. And you have to at least think about things before you have that linguistic pathway.
I thought you were going to start talking about how if you change definitions, you change reality. You want to talk about that, George?
Yeah, let's do that. Like, I think you can. Yeah.
That's true.
You could define tragedy as if you see tragedy as something that is debilitating, you're going to be debilitated about it. But if you define tragedy as an opportunity to become better, you're going to use it as a catalyst, right? Is that fair to say?
I think that's an extreme measure of that. I think we can actually. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just agreeing with you, man. Yeah.
I was going to say, but I think we can look at the redefinition of what it means to be a Nazi in today.
Yeah.
For a long time, to be called a Nazi was the most horrific adjective one could be described. However, now it's thrown around like candy, and so it does. Huh? What'd you say?
Term of endearment.
Yes, in some parts, yeah. So, I think, in that depiction of things, especially in like the places where it is thrown as a term of endearment, you're going to see a change in response to that word, to that idea, to that information. So our words very much define our reality.
I would like to enter into the record. I think anybody who calls someone a Nazi is worse than Hitler.
What a statement.
Yeah,
What a
I mean it
statement.
too.
What a statement. Interesting. I'll think about seconding that. I'll think about it. I have to evaluate it.
Jesus.
You're right. I understand where you're coming from, though, on the surface. I get it. Because if you're willing to take all of that moment and put it into a word and throw it at somebody with just malintent, I mean, what does that make you? So I see where you're coming from. I still have to evaluate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, definitions are changing all the time. Like, you could look at the way people read Marx today. Like, there were a lot of people that read Marx one way and then today read it another way.
Very different way.
Yeah, right. It's interesting to think about the way, and that's definitions changing, right? Like the book hasn't changed.
It's
just
a reflection of culture and society.
I think people are using Marx's terms, his definitions, the way he described things differently today, for sure.
Absolutely.
I think people are using Marxist language. They don't even realize they're doing it.
Right, because it became part of an indoctrination process.
Yeah,
on top of it
became the way that people talk about things.
What do you think, Rado?
Go ahead with it.
Words, yes, it's quite interesting. I think that's why journalism is one of the things where if you're able to get it out there, you're able to have a structure to your emotion, right? Emotions are way in which your subconscious is kind of communicating to you. And so instead of reacting, we try to formulate it into words which are maybe the conscious part is able to analyze it better so people can write it. In the beginning, it seems helpful, but it also turns out to be limiting at some point, I feel like. So everything is a tool. I think it all comes back to, as you were saying, right, having a balance. So yeah, you said using that word Nazi against someone. Now I compare the whole upper caste of India called Brahmin. That Brahminism is just Nazism, hidden Nazism. It's a more cunning way of Nazism, but it's based on from which part it comes. Is there an energy behind it? I could just use any word right now without intention to use it, right? So just because of the knowledge of the word, I can use it. But does it convey the meaning? It depends on much more than just words that come out. So I think it's a dance of many more things. Like honesty takes a personality of spirit. Like if the person is not honest and words come out, those words are like meaningless, like noise. It's just a disturbance, right? Mm-hmm. So we invite different things to the conversation.
Absolutely.
Do you think that emotions are what change definitions?
Not entirely.
No.
I think it plays a part for sure, because if people are going to be emotionally charged about something, they're going to be much more passionate about it. They're going to involve much more of their attention and energy into it, and I think that will alter the perception of the definition. But I think there's a little bit more that goes into it too. I think there's underlying factors. I think there's socioeconomic, there's cultural, there's all these other factors that play into that as well. And on top of intention, to Ranga's point about where that's coming from.
But you said socioeconomic. It does involve in a group population. So in that case, words definition have different meaning. But when we come to individual level, I think emotion and words have direct correlation. For example, when I was God-fearing, God was a bad word. The way I defined it was limited to the manifest form as per Hindu tradition, and I was getting caught in those definitions. But if the thing you're able to understand from fear how to go to love and perceive the same thing, the definitions change for you. So I feel like at an individual level, what's happening within, it has a definition, and then with another person, the definitions change, right? And with group, the same words, like on the outside, it might be like, but the stories are different in different people's head. So it's kind of a magic. That's how I see it. Like we might think there are 4 people here talking, and it has a central thing. It might have a hint of centrality to the conversations, but each one have their own stories going in their head.
Absolutely.
Based on my perception being trapped in certain parts, for me the focus would be on certain set of words. That would be, I would find it more effective, so I might be able to respond better to those words than others, I guess.
Right, but I would also push back a little bit in that context. Your internal self-perception of those things is going to be a reflection of the environment around you, of the culture around you, of the conversations that you're having.
100% I agree, because we are nothing but sometimes that's why I say there is no free will. It's all deterministic, where you're nothing but as you said, the whole world is a mirror to show you, and you're nothing but a mirror that's showing the whole world back to it. So
we're not just a mirror. I would call it a transceiver. We receive and we transmit.
Yes. I think mostly it starts off as mirror. If self-awareness is lacking, it just turns out to be a wall that's bouncing off the ball, or a mirror that's reflecting. So it's predictable. So if self-awareness builds, then you become a receiver, or you say there are different frequencies are there, and I can receive everything and still choose no action towards it, no response towards it.
I don't know. I'm raising a little nephew right now, and he's 13 months, and he's a sponge. He's a receiver for sure, right? And he's not receiving any sort of anything but beyond what he can perceive emotionally, which is really interesting. So, watching him all of a sudden be able to walk now and be able to point at things and recognize certain phrases that I can say, but he can't communicate back.
I would disagree with that. I think that you can use hand signals. Like I think that I know when our daughter was even young, like if you begin to show them like this one means milk.
Oh, right? Like I was saying, he points at things. He asked me for food,
right.
like he has different, so he's communicating.
Okay.
But it's much more of it's a reflective thing.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you.
It's mimicry, and then that mimicry gives birth to intuition.
I always believe mimicry is one of the
highest forms of flattery.
Well put.
100% that is there, and it also the way we learn, right? Most of the stuff you see resultant in society is people trying to copy others.
It is.
Right? Status game comes to that, right? I have to, maybe that's where it lies, so I'm gonna copy, and it's the primal form of learning which people are using. But I think there is certain forms of learning that gets overused as you grow up from developmental stage to, let's say, while you're able to, your prefrontal cortex is fully developed, and now you're having a complicated view of the world. So I think it's much different than when we talk about kids.
Absolutely. And I think, there is a break in there when eventually you can speak, you do have language, you do have all of these things, and when the world doesn't continue to reflect back the best ideals, the best language, and it reflects certain very narrow passages of language and experience, that's when we kind of get dissuaded from this path.
Yes, and I think that ties up to the fiction part, right? This is where when the reality doesn't make sense to your language, we want to listen to fiction to still have that hope. I think it all covers.
That's a wonderful word.
How did you? No, it's basically George predicted. I think he saw the conversation before. He went out, picked up the words. Yeah, we're gonna talk about divine rights, tragedy, hope, and life. I guess
life itself. Yeah. I am an alien, so.
You're slowly convincing me. So yes.
So on the topic of mimicry, like, isn't that also the way in which technology seems to be developing? Isn't it like biomimicry? Like we're trying to fly like a bird. We are, we learn, even though we don't have the same exact methodology as the animals, we are trying to mimic biology. And a lot of times it falls short of biology.
Many times.
Most of the times.
Most of the times. Our best systems are when we can most closely mimic the natural
Right.
order of the world in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and if you look at it from that angle, we're doomed to fail with things like the metaverse. Like, you know, you're trying to mimic reality. You're trying to mimic a ecosystem. Like,
And we're not even close to
we're
being
not even
able to do
close,
that.
man. Let's put all our money and let's put all our eggs in this basket. But look at our track record. We always get it wrong. You know, look at his story, right? History. Like, we always get it wrong. Why would this time be right?
But you can't get it right until you know what's wrong.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's the spiral. We're moving up. We're moving
That's
up,
right.
right? We're like the Jeffersons.
It's a helical model, folks.
That's right. I wonder if we bring it back to the idea of self-reflection and reflection in the mirror, like we mimic, and then once we get to a certain stage, all of a sudden there's no more magic and mimicry. So we begin to try
Innovate.
to project our own image onto the world.
Mhm.
That seems like it's a rite of passage, or it's a noticing or something.
So some people call, the psychedelic experience the true, like when you really have that, looking into the black mirror or traversing the abyss, right? And these are the points, these are inflection points where now you're not mimicking. Now you are, you're taking in all of the different variables, all the information, all of the energy, all of the perspectives, and you are postulating. You're hypothesizing, you are innovating, you are iterating, you are doing all of these different factors of life that allow progress, not just that technical point of view or a consumerism point of view, but a personal point of view, more important.
Yeah. And I think that like when I told that story, I think that was like the first time I saw a different reflection of myself. And maybe that's a good way to explain it, is like, hey, here's me from a different angle. Whoa, I've never seen that side of me before.
But you could imagine it.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you can imagine it, all of a sudden now I have a way to explain it. Now I have a way to move towards it. Now I have a way to manifest it, even if it's not the exact image, or move away from it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That I can't tell you how many times I've thought about things that were horrible and be like, I would never do that. But why am I thinking of this? Like, that's a pretty crazy thing to think about. And I still think about it. I'll never do it, but I still think about it.
Oh yeah. But at the same time, that allows you the perspective to understand your choice to not do that.
That's a great point. I never thought about it like that.
Because if you don't understand the choice of why you wouldn't do it, then what's stopping you from doing it?
And so many people
story about the CIA, and you had some like wild fantasies after you had that experience. That there are a lot of things that we think about, like in the deepest, darkest parts of our mind, that may be like, unaccepted by society, or things that could be really, dangerous for us or whatever. And we like to flirt with those things. It's just like,
you even relish some of them at times.
Yeah, for sure. Even relish some of those things. It's human nature. It's like, if we're not willing to test the boundaries, physically, sometimes the only alternative is to test them mentally, and have those fantasies as if, oh, I could do that, or I would do that, or hell no, I would do that.
Yeah, it's a good point. It is a good point. Well, gentlemen, I love talking to you. And I like I say, I could talk for another 2 hours. Like I really find it rewarding and enjoying, but I have someone more important to talk to in my life, and that is my wife. I love you guys. But you know what? I love my wife and my kid more. So I am going to.
Fair enough. We'll work on that.
Yeah. Work on your reflections. Okay. Become the alien. Anyways, let's start off. Where can people find you, Benjamin? And what do you got coming up, and what are you excited about?
BenjaminCGeorge.com for all of my works and misadventures. New podcast coming up soon. All these people will be featured on it at some point. So tune in and have some fun. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their weekend.
Ranga,
the hours that it is.
Yes. Ranga, what are you up to? what do you got coming up and what are you excited about? Where can people find you?
Just embarrassment coming up as I say one more time. The podcast is coming soon. But apart from that, I don't think, just the way I didn't have any way to define today, I don't think I also am in the mood to do anything. So just being couch potato.
Wait for the timing, brother. Wait for the timing.
Yes.
Look for the reflection.
Mm,
Paul, where can, if someone wanted to buy some queen bees, where can people find you and what do you got coming up and what are you excited about?
No one can find me really anywhere.
indeed. That's probably good too.
Yeah. And I don't know. What am I excited about? I don't know, next Sunday, 2:00 Hawaii.
What a beautiful
This
promo.
podcast.
Thank you.
I don't know. Yeah, you really can't find me. I keep it that way. So.
Good for you.
Yeah. I wish.
I don't know. I've been working really hard on this for a long time. The
And
phone
here
is
you are on a
more.
podcast.
Yeah, and if I got rid of all my spam email, I'd probably get maybe 4 emails a week. I get maybe the same amount of voicemails, and that's it. That's how I like it.
Nice. I think we all know where we can go if we want to get away for a little bit.
So if you want to contact Paul, talk to George.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He seems to find them.
Amazing. All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much. I'm super excited. I'm super excited to have all you guys on board. This is a great time. I got some great podcasts coming up. I got some guys talking about ketamine. I've got Rick Strassman coming on. I've got a couple other. I got a tattoo artist from Poland coming on hopefully soon. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for the future, and I'm excited for tomorrow, and I'm excited for all of us. So that's what I got for today. Thank you for spending time with the True Life Podcast. Dan Hawk, a special thanks to you. Eric Crawford, thanks to you. And we will be back next Sunday. Aloha.
Bye.
Okay. Yep. Awesome.